The past few years, overshadowed by Oliver's emotional detachment, had left me craving solitude, and that day offered one of those rare opportunities for freedom in my room, surrounded by familiar comforts. I had set up my laptop and arranged a few personal belongings around me. Before and after that particular afternoon, which seemed completely ordinary at first, turned out to be one of those pivotal moments for me. Everything had been going as usual. I was home alone with Oliver away on yet another work trip, but the upside of his absence was the opportunity to carve out some personal space, something I hadn't prioritized in years. Before James returned from university, these quiet moments were a normal part of my routine, but now they were infrequent. Unbeknownst to me, the door hadn't completely closed just as I started to relax, and James Oliver's son from a previous marriage evoked feelings in me that were difficult to ignore. His tall stature, sharp features, and piercing gaze had unnerved me the first time we met, but I told myself it was only a fleeting thought because he was out with friends and wouldn't return until later. This made me feel comfortable withdrawing to my room for some private time. I tried to hide what I was holding out of instinct, but it was futile. The sounds from my laptop filled the silence, and his wide-eyed gaze said it all. My body froze, unable to conceal the awkwardness, unable to mute the noise and afraid that my heart would burst. James' expression was one of unforgettable shock and curiosity, and maybe something deeper. An unspoken tension hung in the air, maybe even desire. When I realized that my feelings weren't just embarrassment, his gaze forced me to face the emptiness I'd been holding inside for far too long. "I should have knocked," James whispered in a low, tremulous voice. He slowly backed away, never breaking eye contact, and gently shut the door behind him. I sat there stunned, unsure of what had just transpired, but certain that something between us had shifted. Something forbidden, dangerous yet undeniably tempting 1.0. As soon as the door clicked shut, I collapsed onto the bed, burying my face in my hands. What had I done? I was 42 years old and Oliver's son. My stepson had caught me in such a vulnerable state. My mind replayed the scene over and over, each time amplifying a strange warmth within me, despite the overwhelming shame threatening to consume me. It wasn't just surprise in his eyes. It was something more, as if he understood me or perhaps wanted something more even. Considering it felt wrong, almost revolting. Yet I couldn't stop. My heart raced, and the unfamiliar sensation coursing through me wasn't purely guilt. I'd noticed James' lingering glances before, the subtle expressions of interest, but I'd always dismissed them, pretending they didn't exist, until now that encounter changed everything for the next 3 days. Oliver would still be gone, leaving only James and me in the house. I dreaded facing him, yet beneath my fear lurked an undeniable excitement. It felt illicit, perilous, and impossible to ignore. I hoped it would end there, chalking it up to an unfortunate accident. But I had no idea what awaited me the following day. That night, sleep eluded me. The next day passed in near silence. James stayed holed up in his room, and after hastily preparing a meal, I retreated to the living room. It was as though we'd silently agreed not to acknowledge each other, yet the air between us felt heavy-charged, with unspoken energy we both recognized but chose to suppress. By evening, I decided to take a shower as the warm water cascaded over me. I tried to shake off the memory of the previous day, but James' intense expression kept resurfacing, lost in thought. I was jolted when the power suddenly went out. The water continued to flow, but darkness enveloped the room. Panic surged briefly. I quickly turned off the shower, wrapped myself in a robe, and tied it securely. Just then, I heard James' voice from the hallway. "Emma." "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice wavering. "I think the power's out," clutching the robe tighter. I moved toward his voice, entering the kitchen. I couldn't see him, but his footsteps echoed nearby. "Certainly, we need to find a candle." James said, his voice tense. The faint glow from a street lamp outside barely illuminated one corner of the kitchen, while the rest remained cloaked in shadow as we both fumbled in the dark. I accidentally stumbled into him. My shoulder hit his chest, and we froze, holding breath. His hands instinctively went to my waist to stud me, but the touch felt deliberate. charged with something more than just reflex. "I didn't see you." James whispered, his voice barely audible. Our eyes locked in the dim light filtering through the window. The connection between us in that moment was stronger than anything I'd ever felt before. One O's. "It's okay," I murmured, though my trembling voice betrayed me. My heart thundered so loudly I was certain he could hear it. Henry's gaze dropped to my lips, his warm breath brushing against my face as the space between us dwindled to almost nothing. "Emma," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't want to pull away in that instant. Every boundary I'd clung to seemed to dissolve. Just then the lights flickered back on, jolting us both out of the moment. We stepped back abruptly, as if caught in the act. James moved toward the breaker box, pretending to inspect it, but I knew the weight of what had just happened lingered heavily between us. When I returned to the living room, James followed his gaze, never left me, and this time there was a determined glint in his eyes. "Emma, we need to talk," he said, his tone making it clear this wouldn't be an ordinary conversation. My heart raced again as I sat across from him, the tension between us almost suffocating. We both knew this conversation had been inevitable for some time, an unspoken understanding passed between us. Nothing would ever be the same. James lowered his gaze, speaking softly. "Emma, I'm sorry about yesterday. If I made you uncomfortable, it wasn't intentional. When I saw the door open, I shouldn't have looked," he said, his voice faltering as he searched for the right words, but I couldn't stop the rush of emotions his apology stirred in me. My heart raced and warmth spread across my face. "Yesterday I began trying to downplay it. I was just so embarrassed. It doesn't matter," I added quietly, though my voice lacked conviction. James sighed and leaned closer. "No, it does. It's impossible not to notice, Emma. You're lonely, and that's not your fault." Tears welled up in my eyes. Hearing my loneliness articulated so plainly left me unable to deny it. "I thought I had gotten used to it," I whispered, but the warmth in James' gaze encouraged me to continue. "But sometimes it feels overwhelming. I don't know what to do." 1-9 When James placed his hand over mine, my breath hitched. "You shouldn't have to feel lonely, Emma," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "Someone like you shouldn't feel this way for a moment." I lost myself in the weight of his touch when I looked up at him. The sincerity in his expression was undeniable. That's when I realized this connection between us wasn't some fleeting misunderstanding. James was serious. I tried to shift the topic. "I want to talk about Carly," I said, my voice steadier now. "You told me you broke up." "But why?" James paused, then exhaled deeply. "Because I haven't felt anything for her in a long time." He admitted that relationship was over. I just couldn't admit it. I processed his words carefully. "Then why now? Why end it now?" I asked. For a moment James locked away, then met my gaze again. "We were so close I could feel his breath. Because I like you, Emma," he said, his voice low but clear. "Carly didn't matter anymore. You've been on my mind for a while, that's why I ended it." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came in that instant. James gently placed his hands on my waist and pulled me closer. Our lips were mere inches apart, and I realized this wasn't just a fleeting attraction. This was a point of no return. When James' lips finally met mine, it felt as though time stood still. His warmth, certainty, and the pull I felt toward him consumed me entirely. My heart raced uncontrollably and my mind went blank. There was nothing but this moment, here and now with him. 1.TWs. Here's a rephrased version of the continuation of your story. At some point, the intensity of my emotions overwhelmed me and I felt compelled to act slowly. I broke the kiss, pulling back just enough to catch my breath, gazing into his eyes. I whispered, "I've been drawn to you for a while now." As those words left my lips, every barrier between us crumbled. A heavy silence hung in the air, a pivotal moment where we both silently questioned how far we were willing to go. I locked eyes with him, took a deep breath, and stood up. He looked surprised, but there was an unmistakable spark of desire in his gaze. "I can't bear this loneliness anymore," I said, my voice steady and resolute. I had held back for so long that stopping now felt futile. Henry's eyes remained fixed on me, intense and unwavering. Slowly I untied the belt of my robe, letting it slip off my shoulders and pull at my feet. His gaze followed every movement, lingering as the fabric fell away without a word. I walked toward the large couch in the living room, sinking gently into its soft cushions. James didn't hesitate. One by one, he removed his clothes, placing them aside with deliberate care. Each motion felt purposeful, and as if defying time itself, moving inexorably towards something inevitable. He knelt beside me, one knee resting on the couch, his hands gripping the cushions on either side of me for support. As he leaned over me, I could feel his warm breath on my skin, sending electric waves through my body. When our eyes met again, his lips found mine. That kiss wasn't just a kiss, it was an explosion of every suppressed emotion, every forbidden thought, every longing born from years of loneliness. James' hands moved to my waist, his touch tender yet confident in that moment. Something inside me stirred, something I had long forgotten. The more he continued, the more I realized how deeply I was drawn to him, savoring every sensation. Soon my body trembled, and as I closed my eyes, a soft sound escaped my lips. When I opened them again, I saw James' broad shoulders beneath my hands, his face flushed, his breathing heavy. We were both lost in the moment, completely consumed by each other. Henry looked elated, his affection evident. As my body began to tremble once more, I dug my nails into his back. He seemed to relish it, surrendering himself fully. A warmth spread through me, overwhelming and exquisite every moment. With Henry was intoxic, a mix of exhilaration and unease. Oliver still had a few days before returning home, and during that time James and I crossed boundaries I never imagined I'd dare to breach. Everything felt so natural, so inevitable, that the wrongness of our actions faded into the background. James filled the void Oliver's indifference had left, making me feel alive again. When Oliver finally returned, his detachment remained unchanged. The loneliness I had endured in his absence, and the connection I had found with James only widened the gap between us. Still, Henry and I continued to exchange messages, even with Oliver around talking to him, filled a void in my life. I couldn't ignore one ordinary evening. Oliver mentioned a work meeting and said he wouldn't be home for the night. A surge of excitement coursed through me. I grabbed my phone and began typing a message to James. "Oliver isn't home tonight, it's just us. I can't wait to see you." I hesitated for a moment before hitting send, my heart racing. Finally, I pressed the button and placed my phone on the table, a faint smile spreading across my face as I anticipated the night ahead. Meanwhile, James was dealing with a different kind of challenge. He was confronting Carly, his ex-girlfriend, whose obsessive behavior had become unbearable. He decided it was time to put an end to it. Carly's eyes burned with determination and resentment as she interrupted him at every turn. "Carly, that's enough," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed his exhaustion. "Stay out of my life, I don't want you anymore." Just then, James' phone buzzed on the table. Carly's gaze shifted to the screen, her fake smile vanishing instantly. I knew it. She hissed, venom dripping from her words. "I saw you too," kissing before James could react. She snatched the phone from the table, clutching it tightly. "I'll tell Oliver everything," she spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "I've been watching you both every day." James' heart sank. He knew the situation was spiraling out of control that evening. James told me about his confrontation with Carly. "I talked to her yesterday." He began, his voice calm but strained. "Nothing happened. I just told her to stay out of my life. She's been bothering me for a while, but it's over now." His words brought some relief, but a lingering unease settled within me. The next day, Oliver's behavior took a startling turn from breakfast onward. He was unusually attentive, normally distant and cold. He suddenly seemed to be everywhere, watching me closely at every opportunity. Are you okay?" "Emma, has something been going on lately?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine. There was a hint of suspicion in his voice throughout the day. He continued to act strangely, and with each passing moment my fear grew stronger. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted James. "Oliver's acting so strange, it feels like he's suspicious of something. I'm scared." Just as I hit send, the doorbell rang. Oliver opened the door and Carly's voice echoed down the hallway. My eyes darted instinctively toward the corridor. When I saw her, an icy chill ran through me. Carrie stood there wearing a sly, calculated smile. Her eyes shifted between James and me, and they said it all. She knew. and it was clear she intended to use that knowledge against us. Oliver, still oblivious, asked, "What are you doing here?" His voice was laced with confusion, but Carly's gaze remained fixed on him, as if she had rehearsed this moment. She spoke with precision. "Hello, Emma," she said, her tone mocking and sharp. Her piercing eyes bore into me, stealing my breath. She glanced briefly at James before turning her attention back to me, her grin widening. "It looks like we have a lot to talk about," she added, her smile dangerously smug in that moment. Something inside me shattered, my mind raced with chaotic thoughts. What does she know? What will she say? Will she tell Oliver that this is the end? My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I looked at Henry, whose eyes mirrored my own fear. But Carrie's serene yet menacing smile was the most terrifying presence in the room. That's when I realized that this was just the beginning. If you've read this far, I know my story has touched you. There's a lot more to share, and you don't want to miss a thing, so click the subscribe button. Activate notifications and post a comment expressing your expectations.